Alla Tulia Meldonia Ahara Mariase, and welcome to the second video in this series all about the lands of Beleriand in the first age of Middle-earth. So in the last video I talked all about the native Dark Elves of Beleriand and their High King Eleuthingol. And for thousands of years these clans, the Sindar, the Falathrim and the Lyaquendi, were the only elves in Middle-earth. But in this video, everything's going to change. So in the last series of videos I made, I talked all about Feanor, the greatest elven smith who forged the Silmarils and instigated the rebellion of the Noldor and the banishment of their people from the Undying Lands in the uttermost west. And this video is going to pick up pretty much exactly from where that series left off. And I'm going to start with a massive spoiler, because the very last time that we caught up with Feanor, he was dead. His body had fallen to ash and was borne away like smoke. But the consequences of his actions, they still have to play out, and it's those consequences that fuel much of what I'm going to be talking about today. So, if you recall, the Noldorin elves have been split into two. There are the radicals loyal to Feanor and now his sons, and then there are the more moderate ones, the nicer ones, who followed Feanor's half-brother Fingolfin over the Helcaraxe after Feanor betrayed them by burning their ships. And, long story short, there's not a lot of love now amongst the Noldor. And with Feanor dead, that means that his most radical faction now need a new High King. Which brings us to this guy, Maedhros the Tall, the eldest son of Feanor. And I know I haven't always had the most positive things to say about Feanor, but his son, Maedhros, is a really fascinating character, and definitely one to sear into your brains. And if anyone ever tells you that Tolkien doesn't have any morally grey characters, then point them in the direction of Maedhros. I think he's one of the most complex characters in modern fantasy. Anyway, unfortunately for Maedhros, he doesn't get much time to acquaint himself with his newly acquired kingship. In fact, Tolkien actually tells us that even in the hour of Feanor's death, Maedhros and his brothers were met by an embassy sent from Morgoth. Now, it's never stated who's included amongst this embassy, but from context that comes a few lines later, we can be fairly certain that there's no Balrogs. So, if I had to guess, I'd speculate that the leader of this embassy was possibly Sauron. We know that he's Morgoth's mightiest disciple, so it would make sense that he would be Morgoth's spokesman, and also deception is like Sauron's whole thing. And the reason I bring up deception here is that Morgoth's embassy actually comes acknowledging defeat and offering terms even to the surrender of the Silmarils. Now, it's true that the first battle fought between the Noldor and Morgoth in the War of the Jewels was a resounding victory for the good guys, but even so, I reckon this will probably strike you guys as dubious, to say the least. I mean, the Silmarillion would be an awful lot shorter if Morgoth really did surrender this early on. And I certainly don't want to imply that Maedhros and his brothers were fools or anything like that. They knew full well that Morgoth wouldn't just give up a Silmaril for nothing. But don't forget, the whole reason that Feanor and his sons came to Middle-earth is because they swore an oath invoking the name of Eru Ilúvatar. They swore that they would take back the Silmarils no matter what. And at this moment, the Silmarils are sitting in Morgoth's crown, safe within the impenetrable fortress of Angband, beneath the three iron mountains of Thangorodrim. So Maedhros persuades his brothers to feign to treat with Morgoth, and to meet his emissaries at the place appointed. But Maedhros is cunning, and he reckons he can work this parley to his advantage. So he decides to go to the appointed place, but he brings along far more warriors than was agreed, which is a good idea, but unfortunately, Morgoth had the exact same one. And of the many, many differences between Maedhros and Morgoth, perhaps the most significant in this moment is that Maedhros doesn't have any Balrogs. Morgoth does. And remember, it was a host of Balrogs that killed Feanor and his entire vanguard less than an hour earlier. And tragically, the company of Maedhros fares little better than the company of his father. Every single one of them is killed, except for Maedhros. He was taken alive, just as Morgoth commanded. And so this really sucks, right? This is probably the worst hour ever for the last of the radicals that sailed with Feanor and fought in the battle beneath the stars. But what can they do? They're too few to continue fighting, Angband is utterly impenetrable, and the Noldor under Fingolfin hate them with a passion. But they can't just give up either. We're told that Morgoth sent word to Feanor's other 6 sons, or 5, depending on whether you consider the death of Amrod canon, and we're told that there's only one way to save Maedhros. The Noldor must forsake their war, returning into the west or else departing far from Beleriand into the south. But there are 2 reasons why the sons of Feanor can't do this. 1, Morgoth is the literal worst. He's a pathological liar, and in fact Tolkien even tells us that Morgoth would betray them, and would not release Maedhros whatsoever they might do. So they're right not to trust him. But there is perhaps also a more salient reason why the other sons can't surrender. Each of them swore an oath. They invoked the name of Eru Ilúvatar to do it, and they declared that they would never stop hunting the Silmarils. They would never forsake their war with Morgoth. They're almost spiritually incapable of giving up. If they tried, they'd probably end up turning into something like the dead men of Dunharrow, the other Oathbreakers. And so Maedhros is forced to suffer something that no other character in the Legendarium endures. Morgoth takes him to a sheer precipice upon the Thangorodrim and chains him to the rock by the wrist of his right hand. Now, the Thangorodrim are of course the 3 tallest mountains in Middle-earth, and they were created by Morgoth after the delving of his underground fortress/dungeon of Angband. And Maedhros is just left there, hundreds, maybe thousands of feet above the ground, dangling by his right wrist. And with a bit of Tolkien maths and a quick look at the Grey Annals, which can be found in the War of the Jewels, we can actually deduce that Maedhros was chained to this precipice non-stop for 24 years, which is just outrageous to me. But it also suggests that although we do know that elves need food and drink to quench their thirst and hunger, they can't actually die from starvation. So, for Maedhros, every day of dangling was absolute torture with absolutely no end in sight. However, I should point out that although when I say years, I mean years of the sun, as in, the 365 and a quarter days that make up our year, there isn't actually any sun in the sky yet when Maedhros was first chained up upon the Thangorodrim. But the long ages of starlight are about to come to an abrupt end. And I guess that is the perfect opportunity to segue away from Feanor's sons and move on for the moment to Feanor's half-brother, Fingolfin, the other king of the exiled Noldor. So in this video, I talked about Fingolfin's harrowing journey across the Helcaraxë, the grinding ice, and the much larger faction of Noldorin exiles who now look to him to lead them in Beleriand. And it was at the very moment when Fingolfin's host first arrived upon the shores of Middle-earth that the moon rose into the sky for the very first time. Now, 7 times the moon passed through the sky uninterrupted, but when Fingolfin and his followers entered the area of Beleriand called Mithrim, the sun rose, flaming in the west, and Fingolfin unfurled his blue and silver banners and blew his horns, and flowers sprang beneath his marching feet, and the ages of the stars were ended. Now, I've already talked about the origins of the sun and the moon in a lot more detail, but the reason that Arda's first sunrise is significant right now is because it causes all of Morgoth's servants to flee from the land and to hide beneath the earth. In fact, Fingolfin and his Noldorin host were able to march all the way up to the very gates of Angband, where the challenge of their trumpets shook the towers of Thangorodrim. But there's a really poignant thread of tragedy weaved into this pretty badass moment, because Tolkien tells us that while Fingolfin's host smote upon the gates of Angband, Maedhros heard them amid his torment and cried aloud, but his voice was lost in the echoes of the stone. And so Fingolfin was utterly unaware of the anguish being suffered by his nephew. And because he was of other temper than Feanor, Fingolfin had the good sense to withdraw from the gates of Angband before the Balrogs got a hat-trick in taking down High Kings of the Noldor. So, Fingolfin turned back toward the protected realm of Mithrim, where his people rested and grew strong, for he had seen the strength of Angband, and thought not that it would fall to the sound of trumpets only. In fact, it was on the northern shore of Lake Mithrim that Fingolfin set up the first realm of the Noldor in Beleriand. But although the sun is now shining, that's about the only good thing that the elves have got going for them. You see, Tolkien states that no love was there in the hearts of those that followed Fingolfin for the house of Feanor, for the agony of those that endured the crossing of the ice had been great, and Fingolfin held the sons the accomplices of their father. So although the sons of Feanor are all the nephews of Fingolfin, there's still a load of bad blood between the two factions, and we're even told that what remained of Feanor's house removed their dwelling to the southern shore, so that the lake lay between them and Fingolfin's people. But if there is one person in Beleriand who's having a good time right now, it's Morgoth. In fact, again, Tolkien even states that after Morgoth saw the division of his foes, he laughed. The rising of the sun had massively weakened his orcs, but it didn't matter. The Noldor were doing his job for him. So Morgoth did what he always does, and he made things that much worse for everyone. In the pits of Angband, he caused vast smokes and vapours to be made, and they came forth from the reeking tops of the Iron Mountains. A wind came out of the east, darkening the new sun, and the vapours fell, and coiled about the fields and hollows, and lay upon the waters of Mithrim, drear and poisonous. But, as they say, cometh the hour, cometh the man, or in this case, elf, because it is at this point in the story that another one of my all-time favourite characters comes to the forefront. And that character is Fingon the Valiant, the eldest son of Fingolfin. Now, I have mentioned Fingon briefly in previous videos, and that's because although Fingolfin and Feanor had a rocky relationship at the best of times, their sons bore no such contempt. Remember, it was for Fingon's sake that Maedhros begged his father not to burn the ships when they first arrived in Middle-earth. In fact, the love that exists between Fingon and Maedhros, the profound fellowship that these cousins share, is no less intense than the friendships we see between, like, Frodo and Sam, or between Legolas and Gimli. You probably don't need me to explain that fellowship is a central theme throughout many of Tolkien's writings, and Fingon and Maedhros are one of the clearest examples of this in the Silmarillion. Also, Fingon is just a really cool looking guy. In the Peoples of Middle-earth, we're told that his long hair was combed in great plaits braided with gold. Anyway, Fingon totally deserves his epithet as the Valiant, because just as things are looking super desperate for our exiles, Fingon is the one who takes it upon himself to heal the feud that divided the Noldor. And the way that he decided he was going to do that? Well, he's going to go and rescue Maedhros. So Fingon sets off alone and without the counsel of any. But he actually uses the darkness of Morgoth's smoky vapours to his advantage, until he came unseen into the fastness of his foes. However, when Fingon reaches the Thangorodrim, he looks up and he sees only vertical slopes. He has no way to scale the mountains and no idea where Maedhros is being held. So, in frustration and in defiance of Morgoth, Fingon whips out his harp and he begins to sing. And this demonstrates two very interesting things. Firstly, Fingon seems to have somewhat unconventional priorities when it comes to packing for a quest into the fortress of the Dark Lord. Like, I always wonder, what did Fingon have to leave behind to make room for that harp? But secondly, and definitely more importantly, it demonstrates the power of music and of singing in Tolkien's Legendarium. We've seen it before, and we'll see it again. Singing is a spiritual thing for elves. There's a lot of magic in it. So when Fingon's tune drifts upwards on the wind, Maedhros eventually hears it, and it stirs his strength. So, in response, Maedhros sings a song of his own, and from that, Fingon is able to find him. For the first time in decades, the cousins are reunited. But, unfortunately, finding Maedhros is the easy part. Next, Fingon has to get to him, and that is next to impossible. Tolkien tells us that Fingon wept when he saw the cruel device of Morgoth, and I can only imagine how different Maedhros must have looked after 24 years of dangling. We know that he was in anguish without hope. And along with fellowship, hope is perhaps one of the most central themes in Tolkien's Legendarium. To be without it is to be without a reason to live. So Maedhros begs Fingon to shoot him, to put an end to his anguish and to free him of hopelessness. And this must be so utterly heartbreaking for Fingon. I mean, he came all this way to rescue his cousin, and now there's nothing he can do but kill him? I can't imagine what that would be like. But there was no alternative. So, Fingon strung an arrow and bent his bow. But before he fired, he cried out in prayer. And the subject of his prayer was Manwë, the king of Arda, the king of the Valar, to whom all birds are dear. And, as it goes, Fingon's prayer is answered unbelievably quickly. Because, if you recall, when the Noldor first rebelled against the Valar and they journeyed off into exile, Manwë sent his mightiest servants to keep an eye on them. In the 10th volume of the History of Middle-earth, Tolkien states that Manwë sent Maiar spirits in eagle form to dwell near Thangorodrim and keep watch on all that Melkor did, and assist the Noldor in extreme cases. Turns out, This qualifies as an extreme case, and so the mightiest of all birds that had ever been, the king of the eagles, Thorondor, comes to the rescue. Now, Thorondor is the ancestor of Gwaihir, the Wind Lord. Thorondor's wingspan is 30 fathoms. That's 180 feet, 2.5 times longer than a cricket pitch, exactly half the length of an American football field. That's 4/5 the wingspan of a Boeing 747. Thorondor is simply immense, and he's a great guy to have on your side. Because before Fingon can fire his arrow, Thorondor flew down from the high airs, and staying Fingon's hand, he took him up and bore him to the face of the rock where Maedhros hung. But there is still one problem. When Fingon tries cutting the hell-wrought bond around Maedhros' wrist, he finds it completely unbreakable. He can't release it, nor sever it, nor draw it from the stone. And so, once again, in his pain, Maedhros begs Fingon to slay him. He sees no other way to end the torment. But Fingon does. Instead of killing his cousin, he cut off his hand above the wrist, and Thorondor bore them both back to Mithrim. So, just like that, Maedhros is saved, and the princes of the Noldor return to their people. But Fingon did a lot more than just rescue his cousin. He pretty much single-handedly reunited the Noldor. And Fingon has another huge impact on the Noldor via the actions of Maedhros. Because this is another moment where we see just how different Maedhros is from his father. You see, Maedhros, that's High King Maedhros, firstborn son of High King Feanor, he begs Fingolfin's forgiveness, and he waives all right to rule. He declares Fingolfin the rightful High King of the Noldor, and he even says, "If there lay no grievance between us, Lord, still the kingship would rightly come to you." Now, considering just how arrogant Feanor was and the contempt that he had for Fingolfin, this is a pretty amazing display of humility from Maedhros. And this isn't just some touching family moment. This is a hugely significant event in the history of the Noldor. Because from this moment onwards, the House of Feanor are now dispossessed of any right to be king, and forever after, the high kingship of the Noldor will pass through the line of Fingolfin, all the way to the very last High King, Gil-galad. Actually, that's a bit of a controversial statement. Gil-galad's parentage is notoriously disputed in different works of the Legendarium, but in the published Silmarillion, he is the direct descendant of Fingolfin. Anyway, shockingly, the other sons of Feanor are not entirely happy about what Maedhros has done, and although he's demonstrated that he's a better man than his father, not all his brothers can say the same. In fact, honestly, some of them are possibly worse. So instead of waiting around for his brothers to cause more problems, Maedhros decides to move them all far away from Mithrim, and so he and his brothers pass into the empty east of Beleriand. And the truth is, Maedhros' time as a captive of Morgoth really changed him. Although the fire of life was hot within him, and his physical injuries were healed when he returned to Mithrim, the shadow of his pain was in his heart. I think it's fair to say that although vengeance for Finwë and Feanor and the Silmarils had always been a motive for Maedhros, now he has one more vendetta to settle against the Dark Lord. Tolkien tells us that despite his amputation, Maedhros trains and trains and trains to become even deadlier with his left hand than he ever was with his right. and he even builds himself a fortress upon a northeasterly hill so that the chief peril of assault from Angband should fall upon himself. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time today talking about Maedhros the Tall, but I should also give a little bit of time to the other sons of Feanor because we'll see them all again, and some of them are going to go on to be particularly important characters. So I'll start with Maglor the Mighty Singer. And there's not a huge amount to say about Maglor except that he's the nice one. He's very close with Maedhros, and from this point on, most of what Maedhros does in the story, Maglor will do with him. And as his nickname suggests, Maglor is a great singer. In fact, he's the second best singer in all of Beleriand. And as the Sons of Feanor go, he's an all-round decent dude. I have a lot of love for Maglor. But unfortunately, not all the sons are like that. Next up is Caranthir the Dark, and this guy is definitely not an all-round decent dude. In fact, Tolkien describes Caranthir as the harshest of the brothers and the most quick to anger. In fact, he's the reason that Maedhros removed his brothers east in the first place. But ultimately, I think it's also possible that Caranthir is the most misunderstood of Feanor's 7 sons. He often seems to be the odd one out, and although he is harsh and haughty, I don't actually believe he's evil. We see later in the Silmarillion that Caranthir sort of bows out of the war a little bit, and instead he goes into business getting rich off of trade. In fact, Caranthir develops a particularly prosperous relationship with the dwarves of Beleriand, and he teaches them many secrets of craft, so that they become renowned among their kin. And of course, when the dwarven mines open new trade links, their roads pass right through the lands of Caranthir. So, say what you will about him, but Caranthir is at least not racist, and he does seem more devoted to, I guess what we would call capitalism, rather than cruelty, so he's certainly not the worst of Feanor's sons. Celegorm and Curufin are the worst. So these two guys do pretty much everything together, and they always come as a pair. But that being said, they are pretty distinct characters. And Celegorm the Fair is a particularly interesting character because, at first glance, the dude's awesome. We're told that he's an amazing warrior and an incredible hunter who just so happens to be a personal friend of the Valar Orome. That's the god of hunting. Orome taught Celegorm great knowledge of birds and beasts, and also all of their languages. Orome even gave Celegorm a giant pet dog, who I'm not going to talk about right now, but rest assured he's even more awesome than he sounds, and we'll get there. But for now, Celegorm is the fairest son of the mightiest elf ever in beauty and skill and strength, yet he's an utter psychopath. And his brother Curufin the Crafty isn't really any better. In fact, one could make the argument that Curufin is worse. Although I do feel that Curufin is bad in a very different way to how Celegorm is bad. You see, Curufin is a legit genius, just like his father, and we actually know that he was Feanor's favourite son, and the one who inherited the most of his father's skill. Furthermore, although no wife is ever mentioned, Curufin is the only one of Feanor's sons to produce a child. And that child, Feanor's only grandson, is called Celebrimbor. And that is a name that I reckon you guys are all already familiar with, because one day Celebrimbor is destined to forge the Elven Rings of Power. Although I gotta say, that is a long way off yet. Anyway, the last two sons of Feanor are the twin hunters, Amrod and Amras. And to be honest, there's really not that much to say about these guys. They took the oath, along with the rest of their brothers, and they sailed to Middle-earth, but there's very little to say about them as individuals. In fact, perhaps the most interesting detail isn't even canon in the Silmarillion. I talked about it in more detail in this episode, but according to the peoples of Middle-earth, one of the twins isn't even meant to be alive at this point in the story. In a later writing, Tolkien told us that one of the twins was accidentally burned alive when Feanor set fire to his ships. Now, it's actually kind of unclear which brother survived, because although Tolkien says Amrod is the one who burned, in that draft their names were switched, and Amrod was the younger brother. In the Silmarillion, Amras is the younger brother, so take your pick. And honestly, it doesn't really matter. It's debatable canon anyway, and whatever you choose to believe, either both of the twins or just the elder twin eventually takes up residence in the southeast of Beleriand, under the wing of their older brother, Caranthir. And I'm afraid that's pretty much it. But just before I finish, there is one more thing to mention, and that's the Dark Elves, the ones I talked all about in the last video. So we're told that there were a small number of indigenous Sindar living in Mithrim when Fingolfin built his settlement there. And these Sindar elves are subjects of the Grey King Eleuthingol. Now, the Noldor met these Sindar with gladness, but there is an interesting detail here that demonstrates Tolkien's incredible knowledge as a philologist. Because, I guess just as would happen in real life, the languages of the two clans of elves have been sundered for thousands of years, and so due to perfectly natural linguistic evolution, speech was not easy between them, for the tongues of the Calaquendi in Valinor and the Moraquendi in Beleriand had drawn far apart. And I find this is just a fascinating detail that makes Tolkien's world feel so alive, for the exact same reason that in the real world Latin turned into Italian and also French and also Spanish, the original language of the Quendi has now split into the Quenian language of Valinor and the Sindarin language of Beleriand. Isn't that just an awesome attention to detail? Anyway, although I've talked a lot about the sons of Feanor and the sons of Fingolfin, don't forget there was a third brother, whose children I've not mentioned at all yet. So if you recall Finarfin, he is back in Valinor, ruling the faithful Noldor in paradise. But his children did not stay with him. They followed their uncle Fingolfin to Middle-earth. And of course, the most famous of all Finarfin's golden-haired children is his daughter Galadriel. And along with her brothers, they are destined to be the first of the Noldor to encounter the Grey King of Beleriand, Eleuthingol. So that's what we'll explore in the next video, the unfolding complexities of Noldorin exiles living in Sindarin lands. And we'll also take a look at Morgoth's greatest attack yet on the elves of Beleriand, the third and so far the greatest battle in the War of the Jewels. So make sure you don't miss that by hitting the subscribe button and leave a like and a comment below if you enjoyed this video. But as always, until next time, my dear friends, much love, stay groovy, and navaer mellyn.